grateful to Professor Tyagi that he has invited me to come this morning. We had an interesting conversation, the result of which is that I am here with you at 11 in the morning. But welcome very much to SAU. I love to see people from other universities come to the South Asian University. We are still a young university and it feels good when people come here. This morning, it's a pleasure and a privilege to have with us Professor Oomen. He and I have worked quite long and hard in the library committee of the India International Center. And it was a pleasure to have him there, as it is to have him here. And we have a very distinguished panel, Professor Afzal Wani from GGIP, Professor Manoj Kumar Sinha, and Professor Y.S.R. Murthy from Professor Sinha is the Director, Indian Law Institute, and Professor Murthy is the Registrar at the O.P. Jindal Global University. I think, Raj, you can actually take over this university. We seem to be full of O.P. Jindal University here.
That's right. I also feel that.
Isn't it?
Both the Vice Chancellor and the Registrar.
Both Vice Chancellor, Registrar, no, the afternoon panel is also full of O.P. Jindal University. But what a lovely university you have made. It was a pleasure to be there the other day. And how well you are doing there. Now, I'm that odd creature who did law very late in my life. I did law. I did 2 degrees in
literature.
I did literature. That's why I'm telling you I'm that very odd creature that I did law 81 to 84. I was at the Delhi University, the Campus Law Center. And that was a result of my having fought with my university for, for 10 long years. And I used to be totally literature. So I had no idea what used to go on in the law course, which I'm sure most lawyers also have no idea about. Having experienced law courts on my pulses now, I think most lawyers there also have no idea what's going on in the law courts. It's one date after the other date, and a stay seems to mean a final situation in the judgment and orders. But yeah, I not only did law from Delhi University, I did a master's in law also, Professor. Yeah, and I had no intention of actually coming back to teaching literature. I was all set. I enrolled in the bar. I was all set to start my practice. And then my husband got posted to Vietnam as ambassador, and I had 2 little children, and I said one parent can't be in Vietnam and the other in the law course. What will happen to the children? So I won my case, and I went back to Hindu College. So that is how I did my law. Anyway, but law and literature actually go very well. And I think the 2 things relevant I did in my life, I guess literature gives you a breadth of vision, but was studying law. It gave me a huge clarity because I didn't just study law to practice. I studied law to understand law. And studying law and learning some Sanskrit in order to translate the Gita. So the 2 things that I brought clarity and peace into my life were these 2. And it's a real pleasure that you are celebrating the Human Rights Day, which is to my mind, if you don't mind my taking 2 minutes of your time, it's a great adventure. It's a very idealistic adventure. It's born out of misery, squalor. I actually approach it a lot from the side of literature and see how it developed. Inequity, exploitation, cruelty. It's born out of feudal domination, tyranny. We can't forget Auschwitz. I have personally visited Auschwitz. I have visited the Tilslung Museum, which was ironically an educational institute turned into a torture chamber with a huge stack of skulls outside and an array of passport-size photographs of all those who were tortured and killed. It's a chilling experience. Only country in the world where we got notices, circulars saying another mass grave has been discovered. Please come and attend at 9 in the morning. So, this kind of tyranny, complete vacuum of ethics, and so human rights was born to seek human dignity. Material, social, and psychological. However, there was a huge amount of cruelty preceding it. The 2 world wars had happened. And what did it give rise to? As I said, I mix my law and literature. What it gave rise to is existentialism. Just this moment I exist, that's all. Existentialism. It gave rise to the theatre of the absurd. It gave rise to a theatre of cruelty. And law students who are here would do well to have a look at the very depressing, morbid literature that followed, that was a precursor to the end of the war and followed the war. Life seemed to have lost its meaning and purpose, and it led to plays like Waiting for Godot. If you get a chance to see Waiting for Godot, more than reading it, please see it. When you read it, you kind of get tired of it. And when Waiting for Godot was opened, it was damned by the critics. But when it was staged in a prison, the prisoners loved it. And so started a journey of Waiting for Godot. It led to Camus' Myth of Sisyphus. I don't know how many of you have read Myth of Sisyphus, which is based on the Greek Sisyphus, who rolls his barrel up a hill every day, only to let it go and it rolls down. And again he starts rolling it up. And Camus' purpose was to say that our lives are like that of Sisyphus. Every day we roll a barrel which comes down. So what led to this despair was the unimaginable cruelty, where all the ethics of war were broken. And it led people like Beckett, Ionesco, all the absurdist writers to ask that if man has lost all values, if life has lost all values, why should we live? Why do we not commit suicide? And he gave the example of people going to work. Instead, in the bus in the morning, you see everyone facing one side. In the evening, you see everyone facing the opposite side. And this is the journey of a human life. And so it led to the Declaration of Human Rights on the 10th of December of 1948. But I would also like to give you a little bit of what I understand. I could be wrong in it. The history of getting, and Professor Oman is the best expert on that, when Hamlet said, "What a wonderful piece of work is man." It's a movement that started from the Reformation, Renaissance, when God, so as to speak, was dethroned and man was enthroned and became the center of all activity. So we moved on from there to the age of reason, to the establishment of the science, to Bacon's rationalism, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, which brings me to the French Revolution of liberty, equality, and fraternity, with a chilling reminder that when the mob takes over, the guillotine works overtime. So there are no clear-cut divisions that people in power will be cruel and people outside of power will not be cruel. In fact, experience has shown us, whether in Africa, whether else, mainly I've read African novels and their representation of what happens, that when dictator is overthrown, then those who come in his place become even more autocratic and dictatorial. And that's in the very nature of a revolution, because you say in a nutshell, "Doodh ki nadiyan bahengi," which is not quite true, because it cannot really happen. And so we need to take our rights, to my mind, with a little bit of caution. It cannot become a totally rights discourse. Otherwise, we are doomed to same kind of cruelty that happened when there was no rights discourse and there was only a domination of man by man. And because this rights discourse has led to many things, of course, prepared over centuries, but led to the American freedom. It led to abolition of slavery. It led to starting of women's rights. It led to the trade union movement. It led to labor laws, mass education. From even school education was elite. It turned into a right for everybody else. But this was also the time of colonization, indentured labor. And this too finally has given way to decolonization. However, that is not the end of the story. Inequalities developed between the affluent north and the poor south, and it has led also, and I would like to add that word of caution, to an education system which is posited on a model of development which was the European development, model of development, which America also took over and we accepted as a right, as the only mode of development. And to talk of David Orr's myths of education, he says, it is this education system and the model of development that we have taken that has ruined everything worth living for. So we today are talking of odd numbers and even numbers in our driving. We have no air to breathe, no water to drink, no forest, no anything that you can even live by. It had led to a belief in rationality that once human beings become reasonable and knowledgeable, they will become good. That is not true. In fact, if I go back to Radhakrishnan's one of his convocation addresses, he said, I fear the devil, but I fear the educated devil even more. So education can lead to a lot of other things if we are not careful about our ethical values. It has led to a belief that we can restore what we have destroyed, which is not true. It has led to the belief that we are at the acme of our knowledge, which is also not true. It has led to the belief that we can manage planet Earth, which is not true. It has led to the belief that ignorance is a solvable problem, and so you have this frenetic looking at the internet and a neurotic feeling that, oh, all this knowledge is, how am I going to absorb all this, how am I going to take all this? But ignorance is not a solvable problem. In fact, the more you know about something, the less you know about everything else. So the areas of ignorance have actually increased, not decreased. And this debate between the generalist and the specialist will go on. So what I'm really trying to say is that we have today regional conflicts, use of weapons of mass destruction. As I told you, Vietnam, I have lived in Vietnam, I have traveled in Vietnam. I have crawled into those tunnels. I have met a woman, yes I have. I was very privileged to also meet General Giap. And I have met a girl who was born in a tunnel and spent the first 9 years of her life in a tunnel. We have also, but it's amazing, that country after 30 years of war had 100% literacy. They ran schools in the tunnels while the bombs were falling on them. In fact, the Americans put bombs at the mouth of the tunnel when they realized that they couldn't get hold of them. I have seen huge tracts of land completely devastated and nothing can grow there. Children who have got born with diseases because of this carpet bombing that took place there. We have the greatest human migration ever in the 20th century, refugees, war migrations, internal strife, including our own partition. It was almost like a Holocaust, although we do not look at it like that. So rights discourse alone will lead to this, unless the duties are also looked at. So while you are looking at the rights, I hope you will also look at the corresponding duties that were a part of a constitutional amendment during Mrs. Gandhi's time. And the sense of societal and social responsibility that must carry on with the rights discourse. You are all students of jurisprudence and know much better than me. Every right has a corresponding duty. Every privilege has a corresponding responsibility. And remember, we live, was it yesterday, day before, Professor Gohar Rizvi once again reminded us what I always say. We live in the poorest part of the world. South Asia is the poorest part of the world, with the largest number of young people, with the largest poverty, largest amount of illiteracy. So, at least South Asian University, we need to look, when we say a regional consciousness, we need to be conscious of that. And that is why on my way down I was asking Dr. Ahmed that gradually we should start inviting on Rights Day people from South Asian countries, because it's an important day to remind ourselves that we have rights and duties both. With these few words, I welcome all of you, and I hope we are going to have a wonderful, wonderful discussion. Thank you very much.
Now I request, thank you, President Madam, you have rightly pointed out a relationship between law and literature. You have also mentioned French Revolution, Trinity, what we have got out of this particular revolution that has really shaped the subsequent making of the constitutions. And you have also touched upon the regional and global dimensions and paradigms, how to preserve human values, and what has been the discourse about Asian values, because the Asian jurisprudence on rights, that is not on rights, rather it is a duty-based jurisprudence. And let us move on from here. Once again, I am very thankful to Madam President. Now I request Honorable Professor T.K. Uman, Professor Emeritus of Sociology from Jawaharlal Nehru University. And he is having, almost 30 pages, CV, and that will take a lot of time. And I am a very small person to measure or to map his, achievements, positions, whatever he has contributed in the enlargement as well as in the upliftment of the sociological ideas. Not only the sociological ideas, but his ideas have immensely contributed in uplifting the society, and that has been a model because he has been there in and out of the government's committees, where he has also worked a lot. So without going into the nitty-gritty of details of his achievements, I hand over the reins to Professor T.K. Uman to chair this ensuing session on international human rights. Thank you very much.